Well, thank you very much. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here in this webinar. And what I have on the menu today is 4 topics. First, I will talk about how research integrity and open science are in a way 2 sides of the same coin. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the National Survey on Research Integrity, which was indeed also presented on the main stage in the Cape Town conference that has been just alluded to. And then I'll move on to how come that researchers not always do the right thing and not always do good quality research. And then I end with the idea, what can research institutions do? And then maybe in the discussion, we can dwell a little bit on these and related topics. But let me start with how things hang together. Most of you will know that most people have the first association when they talk about research integrity with research misconduct. And in North America, they call that FFP, fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism. And it's all awful, and it's also awful because it's a threat to the validity and also the trustworthiness of research. And more recently, we have discovered that there are some minor evils as well, and these minor evils we call questionable research practices. It's basically cutting corners, usually of the methodological nature, but that's not exclusively so. And why they are so abundantly available, they are also a serious threat and maybe more important than FFP to the validity and the trustworthiness. And even more recently, we discovered that we have a problem in research, and that is labeled the replication crisis. On average, about half of the studies, when you redo them exactly similarly, you get different answers. And that's not reassuring, is it? Now, on the upbeat, we have this open science thing, all these modalities, and specifically open methods, that is pre-registration and registered reports, for instance, having open codes, how you analyze your data and a vision to analyze your data, and having open data are important because then it is transparent. And by virtue of that transparency, research become more trustworthy. It is accountable. You can check it, you can redo analysis, you can redo studies, all because the recipe and the data and the methods are completely available. Now, open science leads to responsible research practices together with a few more. And these things, and these are the green lines, can help fighting the replication crisis, the questionable research practices, and maybe also a bit of FFP, and that will fuel trust again. So in short, research integrity and open science are 2 sides on the same coin. And this is the lead investigator of this national survey I alluded to. We did it in the Netherlands. It was published this year. And by the way, you will get the PDF with below the slides all the references I'm using. I didn't put them in the slides, but you will get the 2 lead articles of this national survey. And what we did is we surveyed all academic investigators in my small country, the Netherlands. And we asked them about 11 questionable research practices on a 7-point scale, whether they engage in that never to very frequently. That is ranging from 1 to 7. 7 is the high side, whether they engage in it during the last 3 years. And maybe amazingly, between 15 and 70% admitted to not submitting or resubmitting negative publications. That is, publications that are not confirming your hypothesis. They admitted playing down flaws and limitations of the studies. They admitted to, many investigators admitted to insufficiently supervise and mentor their junior co-workers, students, PhD students, postdocs, what have you. And then many people had insufficient attention to their equipment, skills, and expertise, or took inadequate notes. And when you take that all together, I told you we have 11 questionable research practices on the high end of that 7-point scale. more than half admitted to engaging frequently in at least one of these 11 questionable research practices. So this is common. This is very common. This is alarming common, the insufficiently good quality research. And we also ask about fabrication and falsification, and self-admitted, it won't be an exaggeration. People would be hesitant to admit that, although our survey was completely anonymous. 4% admitted to fabrication and 4% to falsification, which is awful in a way as well, but much less than questionable research practices. Now, one might wonder why people engage in these things. We all entered research because we wanted to do the right thing and to do good research and to make a difference. Now, there may be individual factors involved, virtuousness of the individual, for instance. There may be institutional factors, and that is parameters of the research climate in the lab. How hierarchical is it? How are the habits to help each other in the lab, for instance? And systematic factors under the heading of inadequate or less adequate incentives. And in our survey, we had some evidence on these things as well. We looked at a bunch of explanatory factor scales in the domain of drivers of the good and the bad things. The bad things are fabrication and falsification and questionable research practices. And the good things, like I alluded to already, are the responsible research practices. Now, the likelihood of detection by reviewers, detection of you being fraudulent or suboptimal, that was associated strongly with less FFP. It was cross-sectional, so you should be careful. Two ways to do supervision. You can help your pupil to survive in academia by cutting corners to make their career more successful. Then you will get more questionable research practices. And the other mode of supervision, and we had a scale for that as well, that is responsible supervision, learning your pupils to do the right thing, and that lowers questionable research practices and higher responsible research practices. And then the perceived publication pressure had a rather predictable influence, more questionable research practices and less responsible research practices, the higher the publication pressure was. Now, of all these three things, individual, the lab, and the system, I have a few examples in my presentation. Let me start with the individual factors, the virtuousness of the person. And we have all these wonderful codes of conduct. You have them in South America as well, I'm sure. And they all are based on the Mertonian norms of Robert Merton, and he coined them in the 40s of the last centuries. And the norms can be shortened and memorized by Kudo, communism, communalism, it's often called, universalism, disinterestedness, and organized skepticism. The point is that these are the principles of how we are supposed to do research, and that is the mother, so to say, of all the codes of conduct and the virtues researchers need to have to do their work well. This is a Nature paper of a European consortium project, and it talks about what can research institutions do to foster research integrity better and optimally. And we say you need to have a plan, a research integrity promotion plan. And we also say in that plan, you need to have elements of these 9 topics. You can recognize them, what to do when there are allegations of breaches. You should have ethics committees, good integrity training, supervisor and mentoring. We've seen that already. You should have that in order. You should have systems for declaration of interest and conflict of interest, and so on and so forth. And the wonderful thing is, you find that on that website, this European project produced a bunch of guidelines, wonderful guidelines, which can help you and your institution to do a better job. I highly recommend having a look at that, especially the leadership of universities. And this is an example. We recently published 4 guidelines on research integrity education, one focusing on bachelor, master, and PhD students, one focusing on postdoctoral and senior researchers, one focusing on institutional research integrity stakeholders, like the supporting staff, like the leaders of the university, and so on and so forth. And number 4, focus specifically on continuous education, because a one-shot only approach can hardly be expected to be effective. You need to repeat and repeat and repeat, bearing in mind that the population of our universities renews itself every 4 or 5 years. People don't stay that long in universities, especially the PhD students and the postdocs. And this is another element in the domain of how can you do better in the lab and the institution, and that is improving your supervision. This is one of my PhD students. She's currently a postdoc, first in Berlin and now in Aarhus, Tamarinde Have, and she developed a wonderful course for supervisors. How can we train the supervisors optimally? And this training is called Superb Supervision. It has been piloted and evaluated, and now it's being mainstreamed in a number of universities in the Netherlands and abroad. We need specific attention for supervisors. It's one of the most difficult jobs you can do in academia, and we better do that job good. And it's important because our trainees are learning from us. We need to be good role models, and we need to teach them the right things, and cannot emphasize that enough, I believe. And then the third example I have, that is in the domain of incentives. So the system thing. And in the incentives, I'm talking about concern assessment of researchers. And we assess each other a lot. We do that for grant applications, we do that for vacancy, we do that for promotion, for tenure, and all types of different awards. That is important. And what we often see is that these assessments are strongly based on numbers of publications and numbers of citations to these publications, and all types of other parameters that combines these two or makes a fancy indicator of it. So it's counting and numbers. And these incentives, they work wonderfully well. Indeed, when you do it, counting citations and publications, you get spectacularly more publications than citations. But there are unintended effects as well. You get a focus on quantity, not quality. You reward in a way, at least when people are not caught, duplicate publication and plagiarism, because then it counts easy. You reward salami slicing, that is making the smallest publishable article, because then you can have 3 or 4 or 5 articles out of something that should be 1 article. You get citation cartels, because then you count multiple times without doing a lot. You get fake papers, you get paper mills, you get fake peer reviewers. Many awful things happen when you make citations and publications too important. The rich get richer, the Matthews effect, less equity, that means. And you are punishing the time-consuming, responsible research practices, because people are in a hurry to get a lot of publications and citations. And it's not easy, because many people believe that all incentives can, and in fact also will be gamed when the stakes are high enough. So we need to reconsider carefully how to assess researchers. And there are a few wonderful initiatives. Possibly you have heard about the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. If not, have a look, it's wonderful. Our organization, and that was defended strongly in Hong Kong, the preceding conference of the Organization of World Integrity Conferences, The Hong Kong principles, they say you should focus on stuff that matters. And what matters are responsible research practices. You get credit points for that, not so much for citations and other things. No, for being a good supervisor, for being a good mentor, for doing open science tricks, which are taking you a lot of time, but are wonderful for transparency and trustworthiness. So please have a look at this article on the Hong Kong principles. And Naomi Albert-Bon wrote quite recently, it's still a preprint, but a wonderfully good one, an overview, a narrative overview of what more can you do. It's a wonderful box with good ideas how to improve assessment of researchers. Please have a look and consider implement it in your direct environment. Now, research institutions can do more, of course. They can do all kinds of things to improve research integrity and to foster it. I alluded to a number of them already. I often say, please learn from your neighbors, both on your campus, in your country, on your continent, and widely internationally, because the initiatives may not be that dense in your direct environment, but when you shop around a little bit, are wonderful, good ideas. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. And even when you go to the subscribe toolbox only, all the tools are there already to improve your stuff. Get inspiration from these guidelines and materials available. There are massive open online courses. There's all types of webinars and free course materials. Use it. Make a plan, because it should be coherent and consistent. You should not be drawing in different directions there. You should have a really active and diverse research integrity committee. And by that, I don't mean a committee for investigating allegations of research misconduct. No, that's a different committee. You should have that also as well. But this is a committee for the positive side, to improve the research integrity by promoting responsible research practices on campus in a practical way and by policy making. And then, I said it already, you should collectively on institutional level and maybe also on national level ensure coherence and continuity of efforts. That is really, really important. And finally, I want to say these world conferences on research integrity, they are really wonderful. I have a conflict of interest, of course, because I chair the organization organizing them, but they're really wonderful. And if you don't believe me, please check our Vimeo channel. It's freely available. The whole conference in Cape Town, all the plenary sessions are there, the videos, and you can see the materials on the website as well. This is the website of the organization. And when you're into Twitter, follow us on Twitter, because there you get tips about new research projects and new initiatives and new everything. So that's basically what I brought with me. I thought we should use our time for discussion as well. I could talk a lot about what funding agencies can do and what journals can do, but I restricted myself to what you yourself can do being in academia and what your institutions can do. And that's already a lot to improve research integrity.